I was never the kind of person who believed in ghosts, curses, or anything supernatural. I worked from home as a freelance graphic designer, and my life was usually quiet and predictable. After my grandmother passed away, I took a week off work to help clean out her old house in northern Pennsylvania before it was sold. Most of the house contained nothing more than dusty furniture, old letters, and family photographs. On the fourth day, while searching through the attic, I discovered a box labeled School Records. Inside were several yearbooks from the local high school where my grandmother had once worked as a secretary during the early 1980s. I sat on the attic floor and casually flipped through one of the yearbooks from 1983. At first, I was only laughing at the old hairstyles and awkward student photos. Then I reached a page showing members of the photography club. One face immediately caught my attention. My heart stopped. The student wasn't just similar to me, he looked exactly like me. The same eyes, the same smile, the same facial structure, and even the small scar above my eyebrow. The caption beneath the picture identified him as Daniel Mercer. The problem was that I wasn't Daniel Mercer. My name was Ethan, and I wasn't even born until years after that photograph had been taken. Unable to believe what I was seeing, I took a photo of the yearbook page and sent it to my younger sister. Within seconds, she called me in complete shock. She thought I was playing some kind of joke because the student looked exactly like me. The next morning, I searched through more yearbooks and found Daniel again in editions from 1982, 1981, and 1980. Every year showed the same face, my face. What disturbed me most was the scar above his eyebrow. I received that scar after a bicycle accident when I was 11 years old. Yet somehow Daniel had the exact same scar decades earlier. When I returned home, I became obsessed with learning who Daniel Mercer was. I searched school records, newspaper archives, genealogy databases, and anything else I could find online. The records confirmed that Daniel had been a real student who attended the school throughout the early 1980s. However, after August 1983, every trace of him suddenly ended. There was no graduation record, no college enrollment, and no evidence that he had ever existed beyond that year. It was as though he had simply vanished from history. Determined to learn more, I contacted the high school. Eventually, I was connected with an elderly retired teacher who had taught during Daniel's time there. The moment I mentioned Daniel's name, her voice became quiet. She explained that everyone at the school remembered him because he had disappeared without a trace. Search parties had combed the woods, lakes, and surrounding areas, but no evidence was ever found. Then she told me something stranger. After Daniel vanished, people noticed that photographs containing him began changing. In some pictures, his face became blurry. In others, he appeared in different positions, and in a few, he disappeared entirely. The teacher admitted it sounded impossible, but hearing it only made me more uneasy. A week later, I drove back to the small town where Daniel had lived. While researching old newspaper articles, I learned that his parents were still alive. Against my better judgment, I visited their home. The elderly woman who answered the door stared at me in horror. Tears instantly filled her eyes. Her husband reacted the same way. They both believed for a brief moment that their missing son had somehow returned. After I explained why I was there, they invited me inside and showed me old family photo albums. Every photograph contained Daniel, and every photograph looked exactly like me. It wasn't a resemblance anymore. It felt impossible. Then, Daniel's father showed me the final photograph ever taken of his son. The picture showed Daniel standing beside a forest trail one day before his disappearance. Hidden among the trees in the background was a strange, blurred figure watching him. When I asked about it, Daniel's mother revealed something she had never publicly discussed. A few weeks before disappearing, Daniel had become obsessed with that trail. He claimed he kept seeing another version of himself standing among the trees and watching him. According to his parents, Daniel initially thought he was imagining things. But the sightings became more frequent. One night he returned home terrified and told them that the stranger had finally spoken. The figure claimed to know everything about him, his memories, his future, and every detail of his life. Even more disturbing, the stranger told Daniel that one day they would switch places. Less than 24 hours later, Daniel disappeared forever. Before I left their house, Daniel's father handed me a photocopy of one of Daniel's final journal entries. The journal entry was written in shaky handwriting. It described the mysterious figure in the woods and ended with a sentence that made my blood run cold. "He finally told me his name. He says he's not from here. He says he's from 2025. He says he's me." I stared at those words over and over again. Somehow Daniel had written them decades before I was born. The logical part of my brain wanted to dismiss everything as coincidence, but deep down, I could feel something terrible connecting all the pieces together. After returning home, I tried to move on with my life, but strange things began happening. I started having the same dream every night. In the dream, I walked through a forest trail until I reached a clearing where someone stood waiting for me. The figure looked exactly like me. Sometimes he smiled, sometimes he simply watched. Then one night he finally spoke. Looking directly into my eyes, he said, "You're in my life." I woke up screaming and covered in sweat. The dreams were only the beginning. Objects around my apartment started moving on their own. Photographs appeared in different places. One morning I found muddy footprints leading from my front door to my bedroom, even though I lived alone. Terrified, I installed security cameras throughout the apartment. 3 nights later, one of the cameras recorded something impossible. At exactly 3:17 a.m., a man entered my apartment. The image glitched briefly, but when it cleared, the intruder was standing directly in front of the camera. It was me. Not someone who looked like me. Me. The footage lasted 7 seconds before dissolving into static. Months passed, and my obsession only grew stronger. Eventually, I returned to the town and searched for the forest trail shown in Daniel's final photograph. The moment I found it, I recognized it from my dreams. Ignoring every warning in my mind, I followed the trail deep into the woods. The farther I walked, the quieter everything became. Finally, I reached a clearing. Standing in the center was the man from my dreams. He looked exactly like me, except older by perhaps 10 years. For nearly a minute, we stared at each other without speaking. Then he smiled and said, "You're late." Hearing my own voice come from someone else's mouth made my blood freeze. I demanded to know who he was. His answer was simple. "I'm what happens after." The words made no sense, yet somehow they felt familiar. As he stepped closer, strange memories and images flooded my mind. Daniel, the yearbooks, the dreams, the photographs. Everything seemed connected. Then an impossible realization formed inside my head. Daniel wasn't merely someone who looked like me. Somehow Daniel was connected to me across time itself. Maybe he was my future. Maybe I was his future. Maybe our lives had folded together in a way human minds weren't meant to understand. When I asked what had happened to Daniel, the older version of me looked genuinely sad. "He became you," he said quietly. Before I could ask another question, he pointed behind me. I turned and saw a teenage boy standing among the trees. It was Daniel. The moment I blinked, he vanished. When I looked back, the older version of myself was gone as well. The clearing was empty. Terrified, I ran all the way back to my car and never returned to those woods again. I tried convincing myself that none of it had been real, but deep down I knew better. Several months later, a package arrived at my apartment with no return address. Inside was a single photograph taken from across the street. It showed my apartment building. The date stamp read, August 1983. Standing in one of the second-floor windows was me, looking out. waiting. Since then, the photograph has continued changing whenever I look at it. Last week, I noticed a second figure standing beside me in the window. It was Daniel. Written across the bottom in faded ink were words that had never been there before. Yearbook photo scheduled for September 1983. Every night now, someone knocks on my apartment door at exactly 3:17 a.m. 3 slow knocks. Last night, I opened the door and found a 1983 school yearbook resting on the welcome mat. Every page was blank except the final one. There, beneath my own portrait, were the words, Daniel Mercer, missing since August 13th, 1983, last seen entering the woods. And somehow, deep inside, I know exactly where I'm going tomorrow.